So have we got something which looks like change? Were we looking for change? Has this accelerated either an apology for poor performance or a trigger for change we were waiting for? Is it real? So I'd love to hear thoughts on here and provoking each other. And the three questions really would be great to hear answers to for those listening. What do you think has just changed? Is it real? What do we need to do better as leaders coming out of this? And then an amnesty. What mistakes are you making? What things have worked for you? And sharing so that at the end of it, we've all learned from each other's mistakes and successes. So the idea, first of all, who's willing to kick off? Is this a myth, or have things really just changed for leaders and it needs to be fundamentally addressed quickly? Thoughts from the room?
Yeah, if I may start, what for me changed dramatically being the CEO of an industrial company is that facing reality was never that important as those days. So I was supposed to face the reality concerning my market, my customers, my people, my team, my projects, everything. But those days, it touches a very sensitive topic, safety and health of my employees and other stakeholders. And that's what facing reality means those days. And this is new. Answering your question, what is new? We used to take care of health of our people and well-being, but those days it became priority. What is new for me as well is dealing with my own emotions. I was always very emotional about my job, but now I need to face difficulties like people getting sick, people getting stuck somewhere in pandemia, like yourself. You mentioned that at the very beginning of our discussion. So these are things where my emotion prevail, but on the other hand, I need to take pragmatic decisions as always. Yeah, this is something which I perceive quite new. And last but not least, we were very much driven in business with success. And we didn't really like talking about failures and mistakes. Now we need to change it. Now we need to step back from this fear of failure. We need to face it. We need to face this tiger, because it will never ever be any longer that we continue being successful. This is impossible. We need to understand that the ups and downs are part of our everyday business life.
If I may chip in, perhaps a slightly different perspective. To me, this situation is not a change per se. It's more an acceleration of certain trends that we were observing before, which are now more tangible and more visible than before. As Dominika rightly said, the well-being, the health of our people was always high up on the agenda, but it was never such high-end priority as we have it now and as we've had it for the last months. But I'd like to mention three components of it. The first one is delegation and empowerment. When COVID came, when the lockdown started, we quickly realized that we desperately need to decentralize numerous decisions that had to be made quickly, without the appropriate research behind, without prior experience. And clearly, we would not have been able to operate efficiently, effectively, if we were keeping the decision-making process among a limited number of senior people. So we pushed down the power, the decision-making authority to our broad range of managers, and they took it. And so they felt trust, they felt support, and they were very explicitly explained that making mistakes is fine and that it's not going to cause any negative emotions or action. It's going to be a source of important learning. So that's one. The second one, digitalization. It's always been very important for the financial industry, But those who had any doubts beforehand how critical it is, have understood very clearly that you need to put it on your very top of your strategic agenda. Someone said during a different event today that you either digitalize or die. And actually, that's what the banking sector has perfectly understood. And the third component or element I'd like to mention is this different way of working. We had a remote working before anybody heard of COVID. We're allowing our people to work up to 8 days per month remotely. But when the thing started, we had to send effectively everybody away from our offices and make sure that the bank continues operating, being accessible to customers, that everything works smoothly. And basically from one day to another, we ended up with well in excess of 6,000 people working from all kinds of locations. Some were our backup sites, some were simply apartments, houses of our people. So they need to learn how to operate there. They need to embrace new technologies. We as managers had to learn how to make sure that everything works without our ability to physically interact with our troops. And it's worked. Now, the lesson from that one is that if it's well structured, it can work very well, but it requires somewhat different management skills that we all need to develop and make sure that those skills are developed within the organization. So checking if someone has come to the office and been sitting at the desk is completely unimportant now. Looking at the results, being ready to support in a virtual manner, being always able to give advice and guidance has become much more critical for the ultimate success.
So picking up on
sorry.
Just wanted to capture, and I'm going to capture the themes that we're talking about. And going back to something that you said there, Przemysław, it's without us belittling it, very elegantly you say it's about delegating, empowering, trusting.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting because in a crisis, you know, a leader instinct is everyone follow me. I'm in charge now. I know what I'm doing. And the opposite is the instinct. And yet you're saying actually to get out of this, delegate, empower, trust. And that is what we're seeing is working. So hold that, because I'm keen actually to get Eva and Aita particularly to comment on this thing. One of the things we found assessing CEOs, of which we've done hundreds since the crisis began, was there's a new competency which we never saw before. Strategic thinking isn't correlating, emotional intelligence isn't correlating, communication isn't correlating, but the competency that is someone's ability to learn. And we've never done that. When did we ever assess a CEO on, are you able to learn? You kind of assume they're a finished product. And how are they learning? And when you see this competency, it's correlating to the speed by which they're able to do those things you're talking about, which is quite a subordinate mindset, that the solution isn't me, the solution is the people around me. But what's the human side to that? And particularly Eva and Aita, what are you seeing with the human response to this?
You know, from my perspective, it's like, you know, a learning. I mean, we've been, you know, for many years already, you know, the learning or unlearning ability is one of the most discussed, I think, topics in terms of, you know, success, leadership, etc. And I never excluded the CEO out of the equation. Yes, I mean, the CEO. And today, when you look at what is the role of the CEO, it's a role model position. So if CEO doesn't learn, the organization doesn't learn. And of course, the new situation we've been in, so the crisis situation, is a perfect test of you know, whether you as a CEO or you as a leader and you as an organization, you can learn. But I just want to also point out one thing on what you said, because you put the two end of spectrums, delegation, empowerment, and leadership and trust and setting the direction. Yes. which I'm not fully kind of subscribing to, because when you look at what were the expectations and changing expectations towards the leader, is that during the pandemic time as well, is that if you have crisis of trust out in general, like towards the government, towards the kind of the opinion leaders. I mean, you can say that there are no opinion leaders anymore, that are like stable and they last for long. Then you have a time of that is such a difficult time. Then if your organization works well and you have relationships, people turn to you to say, okay, I trust you, what we should do. Yes. And then of course you need to empower people. You need to listen, you need to learn from your mistakes, because we've made a lot of mistakes across all of, the last 4 or 5 months, most probably. Yes. But people are looking at you saying, okay, I will trust you only when you kind of talk to me about, as a human, about what you've done, what you've learned, what worked, what didn't work. Yes. So it doesn't necessarily mean that there are two spectrums, that empowerment doesn't mean a leadership and trust and setting the direction. Yes. And coming back to your initial questions on learning, I mean, from my experience, and my experience is very specific. Yes. Because I've been consultant for 8 years at McKinsey. So I actually had to learn every time I jumped to a new client, or I needed to learn when I jumped to another topic I had to deal with. Yes. But when I joined MPIC, a group in 2015, this has been the most dynamic and learning period for this organization as well, because we needed to change from being old school bookseller that had 70 years of history to actually start being active in digital economy and build ecosystem around our products, our customers. Yes. So the learning, we had the way the organization is passing this test is only when there's lots of questions being asked. Yes. And there is lots of good answers and bad answers coming. Yes. So I know it's like it's sometimes it's just a natural way the organization, when it is empowered, as you Przemek said, to make decisions and to test things, it starts to learn and start to make mistakes, and there's no risk in the organization for making mistakes. Yes. So it depends on your organizational setting and business challenges, because sometimes just the fact that you have such a big business challenge or existential challenge for your organization, it's not that difficult from my perspective to actually move the organization from kind of doing the same for many years to starting doing new things. And what you said, collective wisdom, is such a perfect phrasing of how today's organization work, especially those in change. It's just like all the people collectively have such much, such a bigger knowledge than any single person or organization. And this is something that, especially the new wave of employees, of people, they really expect. So you don't have to force them, you have to motivate. You just need to create the environment for them to do it.
So there's something in what you're saying there, which actually we were listening to in Dominica, and it comes out to Shimislav as well. And I'm going to turn to Anahita now, which is, all these have been subsets of, first of all, I need to manage myself. Stop, just stop, listen. And it's sort of, that poem by Rudyard Kipling comes to mind, the wonderful poem If, which begins with the phrase, if you can keep your head whilst those about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you. How do we, because everything you've said there requires people the leader to go, stop, it's not about me. And the needs of others is how I'm going to solve this. And I think Dominica triggered this thought about managing self and learning. But Anahita, you're in an intimate position of advising leaders personally through getting through this. What are you understanding about the process of managing the self and through that leading others?
Well, that's a wonderful question, Stephen. I would say, if you look at a leader, their sense of self and identity has not only been reinforced and in a way sort of calcified or crystallized throughout their own process of constantly validating and confirming their ego self, but also through the environment in which they've been becoming and transforming into their leadership role. So it's been reinforced. and you're dealing with a sense of self that's really hard to crack open, right? And there's a lot at stake. So if you're confronting a leader and getting them to confront their sense of self, it's a pretty painful process. Unless you're dealing with somebody who has a relative amount of wisdom or flexibility of psyche or flexibility of perception to be able to look at themselves and not take it personally, look at themselves objectively, understand the process that they've been subject to, and be able to sort of accept a stance of humility and openness to changing for the sake of others and for the benefit of others. Nevertheless, this confrontation, getting a leader to make that confrontation with themselves is a very challenging one. And the majority of people, particularly in leadership positions, will try to avoid that because you're putting your finger on a particular wound that you want to call it pride, you want to call it ego, you want to call it something that they've been awarded or rewarded for their whole life. And you're telling them to deconstruct that and change that. You see, it doesn't come naturally. So in the face of a pandemic or a crisis, people are then eventually forced to question themselves and then gradually make that change.
So hold that there, because that's extraordinarily difficult. We're asking people whose self-esteem and identity is, I'm a good leader, otherwise I wouldn't have got promoted to this point.
Exactly.
To actually say what got me successful is unlikely to keep me successful.
Exactly.
And you use words like humility as a strength. You use word, deconstruct myself. Wow. Where do we get help for this? I'm keen to, because what you're saying, and in the leaders we're guiding, that act of selfless self-deconstruction, humility of presuming I need to change is a very difficult thing to do on your own. I'm keen to link in particularly Ronald here and Aniela. You're in those lonely leadership roles. How has it impacted you as a leader? Are you hearing what everyone's saying and resonating? You've got to reinvent, or is there another psyche you're drawing on? Ronald.
I see it from two folds. There is a lot of what you said it's become reality, so kind of sitting in a small room and now where is the feedback? Where do I feel, am I doing something? Am I not doing something? This is the particular thing which I struggled with because I was used and always been used to, I had no problem with the, delegation. That's never been my problem. But the benefit from the delegation was always that I got a lot of feedback and on instant feedback from the organization, which allowed me to be creative. It allowed me to invent new things and hear immediately if things are working or not. And that was standing out. So I had mornings where I had, so what to do now? So it's okay, I can go on the operational stuff, but that's obvious. But what to do? I have general trust into people. And I don't want to control them, but I want to be sure that the things we're doing all together are really happening. And also to the delegation, there is a limit to that because you don't have the same capabilities in everyone. It's not like everyone loves being delegated. There are a lot of people, especially in those times, who actually wait to get a direction. So those are the characters which are perfectly fine in this environment. And those are the characters who are usually saying, now I also feel lost and I would love to hear from someone what to do. Yeah? And giving them the hint what to do, but not closing their minds is the challenge. So that's the one thing. But now I thought a little bit what you were saying from the leadership point of view. And here I think not much changed. Because if you treat the pandemic as a next crisis, or any kind of crisis, which any crisis generates completely new behaviors, it closes some business models, opens new ones, opens up for new behaviors. I think that's the thing when you went through 2009, when you went through 2012 in Europe. So I think you see a pattern in that, right? The context is changing, the circumstances are changing, but the leadership behaviors actually remain. That's how I thought it. So I felt here on the leadership behaviors, I felt, I'm pretty okay. I went through this. But now the context and the circumstances, and especially the closeness and feedback from outside, which kept me alive, was a huge challenge for me. And I still struggle with that.
We'll hear Aniela on this in a minute, but succinctly from yourself, Ronald, what is the biggest change you've seen in yourself as a leader at the epicenter in that very lonely role? What is the most conscious thing you've seen as different as yourself since this thing started?
Yeah, I think it made me much more structured. It put me into inventing models of behaviors that allow me to compensate for what I lost, right? And that's not my nature. So I had to stretch myself to find these frameworks of daily operations, which actually I never needed because I always got an impact, a kind of impact from outside, and I immediately was in action, right? And here there were this moment of 2 hours. What to do actually? I feel like everything is running, and I have no idea to do. So that's, I think, that was really painful, and I have to say that I'm halfway done, and I'm every day trying to find my rhythm, which is, to be fair, not really a natural rhythm for me. And the big question for me is, let's assume we get to a certain normality. How much of that will remain with me, and how much is the remedy only for these times? That's the very interesting one, which I don't think I can answer yet.
Excellent. Well, super disclosure and super to hear that. It's like the subheading of the role of a CEO is now another wonderful day in paradox, and it's a
yes,
challenge.
It is.
And,
Stephen, if I could build on that, I think it's what changed is what we are respected for. Yeah, we were respected for bringing results, for being tough, for as you said at the beginning, for having this strategic thinking. And those days, things changed. Yeah, I'm with you that generally speaking, it was to some extent expected. It was coming, and leaders were, of course, on certain development path. It's not that they appeared in this pandemic situation from one day to another. Yeah, even if it's a kind of black swan effect, we were somehow prepared for that. But what we are now respected for, and what the expectation is, that we show our human face, that this human factor is really present in our everyday business life. And this changed, also our, let's say, challenges are different through that one.
There's something very wonderfully traditional about what you just said, which is going back to how we lead, rather than the sophistication and complexity and theatre by which modern leadership has been wrapped. It's an interesting challenge. Aniela, I wanted to come to you here because you have an organization which is in the DNA of the data of human beings, but how are you seeing it as a leader of that organization? What have you seen different in yourself?
Okay, so I think actually the current situation from my previous experiences also has put us all in what I would say startup mode. And that's because we needed to really reassess and reimagine and really see what are the current needs of our customers, of the patients, and the ecosystem right now with the COVID pandemic. And that required everyone to really, I would say, build on what we would say were the trends, like telemedicine and remote access to clinical trials, where everyone was really skeptical about it previously, and now all of a sudden, with everything that happened, everyone started using and doing it without any problem. And so that's the startup mode, I would say, has pushed everyone over the edge of what everyone knew is coming to actually using the tools that technology gave us today in their everyday business. So that's one aspect that I'm seeing from the business perspective, where, by the way, I'm new in it. So it's really also interesting to see the mindset of different pharmaceutical leaders, where I would say there is a very different spectrum between those that think, okay, the world will never be the same, so I need to build on the new tools of technology and develop the new ways of working, and those that are still, I would say, skeptical and say, okay, things will go back to normal. You know, let's just wait through, and they will go back to normal. So, so it's super interesting to observe. Now, personally, on what Anahita also mentioned in her speech today, you know, the self-awareness and the attention element, which is super important. I completely, in the COVID times, changed the way I organize my day. So I started waking up at 5, which I never was able to do before, in order to have these 2 hours of time in the morning for myself, to reflect, you know, to meditate, to do yoga, whatever it is that I need to do to settle and to make sure that I create space in myself to absorb emotions that I then need to deal with during the whole day of work. And I've noticed that this preparation that I've run myself through gives me a much better capacity to be empathetic and capable to react to my, you know, employees' needs, my family, friends' needs, but also my client needs, and respond with calm and, I would say, wisdom in a way. So that's my personal experience of COVID that I don't think I would have actually, and I would have went into if we didn't have this crisis right now.
Yeah. Yeah, some of the things you're saying which triggers, it's interesting that communication has gone non-verbal, and it's what message as a leader, what message are we sending? The CEO, I've got a real crisis with a shareholder, I'm going to need to cancel the corporate Zoom on diversity and inclusion. Well, all anyone ever sees is you just cancelled a Zoom on diversity. The message you just sent is it's not important now, and we've got this message sending that we don't realize we're doing and what we stand for. And we're going to come on to this in a minute, which is what is our message sending externally. But I wanted to stay on this current theme and get Marta's opinion, which Marta, every day running Google startups, you're dealing with the prima donna, restless, high attention deficit, insecure, high achieving entrepreneurs who are built in, energized by the opportunity of things going well. Is the psyche of the entrepreneur different in this era, or is it seeing opportunity, or is it not?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Stephen. And I'll be honest, I'm still fundamentally biased towards the entrepreneurs, given the fact that I've been a founder 3 times, and this is still very much a sort of how I define myself as a leader. And I think that's also the very reason why I can be useful to Google. It was fascinating listening to all the other contributions, because it's very clear that this crisis has shaken the way that larger organizations are run when that sort of strategic planning is out the window. And there is I always sort of like to compare the corporate versus the sort of startup environment. I think there's a stat from Bain & Company that 85% of corporate executives say that the majority of their challenges are internal. And obviously that is not the case in a startup, because your team is too small, and there's also this whole theory on founders mentality, sort of the 3 things that make startups succeed, which sort of is defined by an insurgent mission. And we know that sort of being mission driven feels very authentic, is something that people relate to, especially in the crisis. And we sort of covered that a little bit in the discussion. An owner mindset and sort of a complete obsession with the front line. What are we achieving? At every point, what are we achieving for our user? And I would say it was fascinating to spend the last 6 months both seeing the changes that are happening within Google and working with entrepreneurs and how they are responding to the crisis. And it's almost going back to this idea of wartime CEOs and peacetime CEOs, and the good startup founders and CEOs that I have the privilege of working with, I'd say are doing fantastically well, because that whole idea of being able to very quickly steer the ship, you're doing new things, so you need to have that sort of that psychological safety with the team and that ability to admit that you've made mistakes. You've got your your sprint, your biweekly sprint, and then you do a retro on what worked and what didn't. So I would say that a lot of the practices, the leadership practices that startup founders and CEOs use have really helped them defend themselves from the crisis, which is not to say that there aren't systemic challenges that mean, you know, when you don't have very much money in the bank, when you don't have large investors that are going to back you depending on where you are on your journey, surviving the crisis, it might really be a case of, you know, survive or die. In fact, I have seen some startups dying or nearly dying. And you know what? On some level, I think it's a good thing, because I think also in startup land, we've created a hell of a lot of hype, which means that, you know, there were some companies raising money or sort of, you know, trying to prove themselves with actually very little substance to what they were building. And now we see that when you remain laser focused on the value you're creating to the user and your ability as a leader to steer the ship, actually, you know, the good ones very much prevail and sustain, and maybe the ones that weren't that strong in the first place, the sort of, this is an opportunity for us to choose the winners and the losers.
So it's great hearing you talk, because actually very similar to all of you, and you're all succeeding in what you're doing, but there is a selfless voice in what you're saying. It is not, I'm the leader and it's on my shoulders and just follow me, everybody. Your psyche is, I'm the leader and it's my job to put in place the conditions that lets everyone else succeed. It's almost a subordinate mindset.
And I think this is also, I think Nelson Mandela was talking about leading from the front and leading from behind. And especially in an environment where we're all sat in, I mean, I'm in London, I've been working from home for 6 months. I'm looking at you sat in offices with you know, I'm both jealous and maybe not really, like I can't really figure out how I feel about it. It feels like a million years ago since I last went to the office. But it's really clear that in an environment where your teams sit in separate rooms, don't have the water cooler conversations, don't really sort of connect in the way that we used to, just empowering the teams, or empowering actually everything from frontline staff to middle management, empowering people, reminding them every day of what we're trying to achieve, what the mission is, giving clear instruction as to what success looks like, and then allowing them to do their best work rather than trying to command tasks day by day. I think in that remote world, that's really the only way to succeed and to continue innovating rather than continuing to do the same thing.
So it's a nice segue. Hold that. Thank you for those contributions, because let's change gear at this point. Your responses to talking about making conditions better on the internal environment, there's a lot of sociology here. There's a lot of anthropology here. There's a lot of psychology here. It's human. You know, coming back to some of the first words we just heard from Przemysław, this is not about me. We're delegating and trusting. And so much more human language I'm hearing from all of you, and we're hearing from our clients, than you'd expect for it's a crisis, command and control task. So let's keep that thought. And if we've got the conditions internally, what are we doing externally? What are we doing to role model a collective benefit to our society? And one of the things we've seen from our own client base is investors, and particularly in the US, they have this phrase, which is, we're giving the company a free kick this year. Yes, we don't expect profits or dividends. We don't expect yield. We do expect you to do better than your competitors. If they're all down 50%, we expect you to be down 45%. We're staying with you. But this year you get a free kick. Now, with an amnesty on commercial success, what else are companies doing? Well, we're certainly seeing a rise and acceleration in discussion of diversity, inclusion, and sustainability. Let's get these agendas in whilst we can put capital and resourcing and priority to them, because shareholders are being forgiving. And we're seeing this happen, but there's something about this, which is, what does your brand as a leader stand for in society? How are you influencing tomorrow's customers, tomorrow's employees? And collectively, what are we doing that builds trust in our leaders of society? Is this something which becomes the responsibility of organizations, or something it just has to stay subordinate to and subservient to? What do we feel is our role as social leaders, as organizations? Views from the room.
If I may kick off that part, I fundamentally believe that large organizations have a certain level of responsibility, and subsequently their leaders have it as well. So we cannot be distant to topics like the environment, global warming, diversity and inclusion, and we should first have our own policy, our own way to be active on those fronts, and also actively react to things that go against our values. I'll give you a very simple example that what we did a couple of years back. There was an event during which people from the LGBT society were badly treated in one of the cities in Poland. And that sparked a wave of discussions on the matter. We quickly put rainbow signs on all of our branches saying, "Zone open for everybody." Rough translation from Polish. And basically, I went public, internally and externally, saying, hey, in this bank, everybody should feel safe, secure, welcome, irrespective. Diversity, however, is not just about sexual preferences. It's very much about age. It's very much about race. It's very much about the level of disability, if any, about all the components that make us different people. So, of course, you know, the rainbow thoughts are the most visible, but I think we as leaders need to explain what diversity means to us and to our companies. You know, shortly before joining this discussion, and for that reason I was marginally late, we are finalizing our management board meeting, where one of the most discussed topics was the analysis of our gender pay gap and what we are going to do about it. The research demonstrated that we still have some. We are much better than the Polish average. And we've just agreed to allocate a certain amount of money to neutralize the gender pay gap, focusing on people who are lowest paid in the organization. And we have pre-drafted our midterm plan to basically bring the gender pay gap down to 0%. So, and those things are important, and they shouldn't be just, you know, topics of conversations or marketing campaigns. They have to be the backbone of what's important for the organization. They have to be subjects discussed among the leaders and as much as with the people of all levels. We should here definitely live by example. We should not be afraid of taking a stance, seeing things that are against our principles and values. And just to close it, we should also be prepared to give up some revenue for the reason of protecting our values. And the final example from our life is that a few years ago, we very clearly and loudly said that we will not finance dirty energy generation. So no conventional power plant will receive a single zloty from us as a loan. And we have stuck to this over the years. Of course, given the fact that Polish energy is regretfully still pretty much based on coal, we have given up certain revenue stream very consciously for the greater good. And I think this, such examples show if you are serious about things that are over and above your quarterly profits, or whether this is just, you know, an image building exercise.
So hold on, there's fantastic words you're using there and some new words, and I'm keen we lift them out and challenge some of our colleagues here. You use words there, safety, protection, and certainly a phrase we hear all the time with clients, and it's become a board agenda, is psychological safety. Is it safe to voice opinion? But you talk about the common good. Now, all these words, you know, these imply a competency which is courage. Do we have the moral courage to do the right thing? And have we had permission to do that before? Because we're in an era now where the news is full of humanity, protecting society, people are getting sick, we have a right to protect humanity is in the news, whether we like it or not. Is this an opportunity to elevate the moral courage for organizations to project humanity in the way you're talking about? I'll leave that as a rhetorical question and see if someone else wants to have a go. The moral courage to do what's right. Anyone?
And I would, commenting on this, I would say that this is the expectations now. It's not the opportunity, it's the expectation. Because over the last years, when you observe what is happening, is one, you have the changing balance between the, how powerful the companies and businesses are versus the governments and the countries and the regulators, first and foremost. The second thing, the transparency, that it's now increased a lot in terms of what companies are doing and how they contribute, what externalities they actually produce and they're not held responsible for. And then the consumers changing to expect responsible behaviors from the brands they are buying. Yes, so now I would say it's expectations that the businesses will take part of the role what the governments and the business and the political leaders had in the past, and they're not able sometimes fully to fulfill the role. So the companies and the leaders, I think, started to realize and then started to take bold steps, yes, and to claim their values and live with their values as Przemek gave an example of diversity and inclusion and supporting minorities, right? And the missing component still a bit, it's the responsibility of businesses for the externalities they create. And this is where, for example, climate change and impact of businesses or climate change is coming into play, yes? Because the businesses are responsible for this, and consumers are more and more aware that this is the case, and they expect that the businesses will take these responsibilities and act appropriately. So I think it's just, and with the COVID situation, it's just got, fast forwarded and elevated more to the agenda. So it's opportunity, yes, but for those businesses that don't take the opportunity as their responsibility, really, I don't think that they have a long-term future. This is kind of today the reality that we need to deal with. Yeah.
So stay with this, because this is either a provocative or a very valuable line of thought. For the last 4 decades, governments, and this is across nations, governments and corporations should have been in unison, and they have separated. It's been government versus corporations in most countries. And yet, of course, society works when this happens. It's interesting, the 2 English words government and governance are so separate now. But this unity of government with corporations, is it possible for that marriage to renew its vows, or has it gone too far?
If I could maybe comment on this, especially in the healthcare sector right now, right? I mean, the current crisis has really shown a lot of gaps in different countries' healthcare systems, and you can see that the company like mine could really contribute in helping to bridge those gaps with all the data that we possess, with all the knowledge that we have. And there is clear direction in the organization to provide that data, of course, without any profits, free of charge, in order to enable that knowledge to spread into the government, so that the decision makers and the stakeholders can make the right decisions. So you can see that somehow the crisis, especially in the healthcare area, has catalyzed that marriage, or that what was divorce, for us to reconsider ourselves again, and it's a great opportunity. You can also see it across the R&D area, where you have a lot of scientists that used to compete right now come together on platforms where they provide data, especially for the COVID vaccine development, which was not seen before. That level of cooperation in order to come up with the right, solution was not seen before. So there are areas where the current crisis is motivating us to become more less selfish and more contributing to the society. And I think that we all feel that as leaders and business people, that it's really our responsibility to ensure that we make this happen.
It's an excellent point. It's a personal responsibility. It's that calling. It's that leader looking in the mirror and saying, what am I doing about it, rather than expecting everyone else to do something about it. And if that collective is there, it's surely possible. I'm going to watch the clock. We've got about 7 minutes left. I'm keen, before we close, just out of curiosity as well as value for everyone listening, I'm keen to get a single point from each of you, advice to leaders in being less clumsy about getting this balance between the internal environment's needs and the external environment's needs right. And how do we do that with fewer mistakes and less clumsy? I'm keen to go around and get that succinct advice from each of you. I'm conscious that I'm keen. Agnieszka, my dear colleague here, who's set this all up, left you quiet, but keen to get your comments. What are you hearing here before we go around the room?
I will have great privilege to continue this discussion on the market. So thanks for thinking about this. We won 10 more minutes, by the way. So so we do have this opportunity. But just to comment on the recent talks, I think it's super important what we are talking about right now, about our leadership of not being really leadership which is separated from whom we are and when we are and how we react to our environment and society. And as much as I believe that, Daniela, you're completely right, that there's some of areas where the renewal of collaboration, ecosystem thinking in between governments and business can happen. There is also a huge lack of trust. And to what Yuval said yesterday about adults in the room, if you think about geopolitical situation globally, I don't think we all can migrate to New Zealand. And there's a lot of frustration. So my biggest trigger for the last couple of weeks, months is, what do we do about this? Can we actually take responsibility for building the values we trusted, and really thinking of creating these microsystems of micro ecosystems of nests in terms of equality, in terms of the sustainability, responsibility, joy, and other elements, which can actually impact beyond our environment. Because we all often, and I would love you to comment on this as well, but we often think about what we do in business in a separation to the rest. But in fact, it's not. We often forget that people who we lead, they have families, they start businesses, and so on and so on. So Anahita, if I may pass to you, that would be great.
Okay. Well, I would say it's important to arrive at the insight that at a very fundamental level, all of us humans, and probably any living being, ultimately wants to be happy, wants to continue flourishing, wants to continue living, and doesn't really want to suffer. I think that is what unites us all fundamentally. So I think keeping that in mind on a daily basis is already a good start. Secondly, I would say not shying away from the reality of suffering. And that begins by, again, having the humility combined with the realism to confront your own suffering. Suffering could be a lack of attention regulation. Suffering could be a deadly disease. It could be a pandemic. It could be dysfunctions in terms of relationships, but to not shy away from that. And to be able to basically attune to the reality of suffering, which then gives rise to compassion. Compassion is actually the desire to alleviate suffering. In order to alleviate suffering, we have to know suffering. We have to be able to resonate with suffering. So I find that these are essential. The other thing to answer, Stephen, your question or your point about just one piece of advice is educate your mind. Our education systems are so, it's shocking to me how we're lacking the education of the mind, educating children's minds and teaching them about inner values, teaching them about their own, the way the mind works, the way emotions work, the importance of interpersonal relationships, so that children from an early age learn these skills, and then bringing these into universities where we specialize to go into the workforce, so that when pandemics hit or when other crises hit, we're not suddenly shocked at the revelation of things that are so obvious and commonsensical and should be with us from early age.
Great point. Well, let's keep this flow of capturing collectively the points of how are we going to support ourselves, be the right leaders for this era. Educate your mind. It's a superb concept, very germane to this idea of the best leaders are learning right now. They're not finished products. I think it's a super reminder. It's an act of strength, not remedial humility.
If I may build on that, yes. Yeah. Is there a better way to educate your mind than by being together, talking together, creating community? That would be my kind of, it's not a piece of advice, it's more a dream. Mm-hmm. Yeah, if I had a dream, it would be a kind of community of leaders, of people with high self-consciousness, and people who really look deep into their hearts and minds, come together and share what they see, what they experience. There were so many stakeholders mentioned in our discussion. Academia was missing a little bit, yeah, another important stakeholder of the companies. I do believe we should become more open, more respectful to other stakeholders. We should simply get rid of all those barriers, and of course understand that we compete with each other, because we will probably continue competing against each other. But the important thing is, and this is really happening, this co-opetition. Yeah, this finding those areas where leaders can really profit from one another experience and build on that for the sake of the society and of other stakeholders. That would be my dream, I would say.
Right. It's nice to very briefly pick up on this idea of talking together. For my own practice, it's been dominated by investors bringing us in when a CEO is derailing. They've lost connection with their company. The technique that's most putting them back on the rails is teaching them storytelling. But we won't go into that now. Something we do together. Aniela, advice for everyone listening.
I was just trying to phrase it in a sentence, and it's not that easy, because I first wrote courage and then make space and time for greater good. But I think it's really ensuring that what we believe in and what is important for us personally, for me personally, also shines through my activity in the business. And I wanted to give you this example here because Przemek is with us on the call, and I find it super sentimental because 10 years ago, Przemek was supporting the Gala of Success of Women in Business, and he actually gave me a prize for my activity in startup, which gave me amazing, encouragement to be where I am today. So Przemek, with his beliefs, where he has been really consistent with, as you can see, because he just voiced it. I mean, he really impacted lives of people, and I'm the example here. So I think it's important that we have the courage to channel through our beliefs and really find time for it in our everyday business activity.
Super, and of course, courage is something which rarely succeeds on its own. It's can you rally people around you to share that courage? I think we have lots to learn that. Thank you, excellent. Ronald, tell us more. What have you learned, and the advice that you want to give?
I would split it in two opportunities and one advice. So the two opportunities, I think it's an exceptionally time to really learn your organization and your people, which is, I think, an obvious one. But it is also a time where if you play the values and you stick to them and you show them in everything you're doing, you actually do a great job of preparing the organization for the future. The advice I would give is exercise intuitive leadership. That's the time for that. Today you can do that, and soon, I think sooner than we expect, the technocracy will again prevail. So use this short slot to run the things by intuition. And I am a strong believer of that, that if you support your intuition by feedback and by some small data points, you will be much better off than really looking only on data and trying to be a technocrat. So that's a moment of learning. Excellent.
Thank you. And going back to the basics, there's one amazing, formidable CEO in an industrial company we're supporting, and she at the start said, I did not grow this company to be fat. I did not build this on inauthenticity. We stick to our plan, we stick to our values, and we stick to our purpose. Well, that was the most reassuring thing. And by proxy, the company has confidence and it's succeeding. But it's something very reassuring there that why do we have to change? What just caused us to trigger an artificial change? Really good advice. Marta.
Thanks, Stephen. So it's really interesting, and just on the authenticity, that actually reminds me of something that the Google CEO did immediately after sort of we globally recognized that there is a pandemic. He sent an email to the entire company and said, stop everything that you're doing, take a day or a week and think about all your activities, all of your projects, and if what you're working on right now is not immediately supporting your customer, your client, your line of work, or actually benefiting the end user, stop doing that straight away and think about how to sort of pivot there. And I think it was quite nice to sort of go back to Google is well known for its for this sort of vision of, you know, respecting the user, respecting the opportunity, and sort of thinking about the consequences of how we spend our time. I think what is quite key for me is, and I think we need to just emphasize that, is just how do we think about economic recovery? A market filled with users or customers or clients that are happy to buy services or products from us, it's a privilege, it's not a right. And we are the makers of the market as much as we are beneficiaries of the market as well. And I think what's really important for me is to think about, first of all, there is opportunity in a crisis indeed, and how can we make sure that the world that we recover to will be more equitable, fairer, better than the one that we're leaving behind pre-crisis? And what does that mean, even from a diversity and inclusion standpoint? How do we make sure that as we recover, we are more fairly and equitably redistributing the resources that we've got at our disposal? That we're hiring better, that we're thinking more about the suppliers that we're using. It's not only often we think about only hiring, and obviously not everybody can always hire, but we think about how we spend our resources in organizations. What are the suppliers that we're using? Are they representative? How do we know that the dollars or pounds or zlotys that we're spending are actually then going back to the market that desperately needs the cash? Because we don't want to wake up 12 months from now with, you know, half of SMBs bust and not really knowing how to move on as society. So I would really just pause for a second and think about the power that our budgets have and what that power can buy us by way of the world that we recover into, and hopefully soon.
Excellent. Making conscious our impact rather than that's an accidental thing of making profits. Excellent. Thank you. Eva.
My advice would be, if you haven't read Professor Christensen's book, Innovator's Dilemma, do it. If you read it, do it again. And ask yourself, what are the disruptions happening that are potentially threatening your business? And this is the perfect year, and the safest year to make those both moves and to change your business. Take out your bucket list with the corporate projects, business projects that you want to do and never had always had lots of arguments, why not? And now do it, because this year it gives an opportunity to do it without any benchmark, without any reference point, because the old past is in the past, and now you can redefine your organization and launch many initiatives that will bring benefits in 2-3 years. And the same, actually, it's the same advice I would give on the personal level. Yes, take your bucket list and start realizing it.
Excellent, thank you. Przemysław, bring us to a close before I hand back to Agnieszka, and take us back to the chessboard, please. How do we get to checkmate socially and commercially as leaders of corporations?
I will be very, very brief. So my advice would be, focus on building, enhancing trust within your organization. Openly allow people to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes together with them. At the same time, stick to your values, be bold, make the decisions that are straight from your heart, and don't think just beyond the current quarter in terms of your results.
Excellent. A leader's ultimate role is teaching, not telling. And that makes that very much alive. Thank you all. Agnieszka, I'll hand back to you, and please take
Stephen, back to beginning, I'm just thinking now whether this is chess or dancing. We discussed both as extremely helpful. I'm just being urged by the organizer that we need to jump off this call, but I feel that we could continue for a long time. And Dominika, why don't we make your wish happening actually, and connect more and discuss more and try to support each other. So thank you so much for coming to this discussion. This is a great pleasure, a great joy, a great energy. And Stephen, thank you so much for sharing your time and your night.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very much, everybody.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. All of you.
Great, thanks. Bye-bye.
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 Bye.
Bye.